Hello again. So last time we left off, we pretty much finished our rig. We have our joints, our controls, our pull vectors, IK handles, everything is named and parented, parent constraint, all correctly. And at this point, we are technically done with rigging our character, but we also aren't. And what I mean by that is, while this character is working properly, like I can animate him, do whatever I want, there are some parts of him that aren't really working out too well. So like if I rotate right here, this looks pretty good. But if I rotate this shoulder right here and rotate it down, it is rotating, but you can see that that sphere right there in his shoulder is getting smaller as I'm moving it down. So if I go like that, you can see the size difference. And that's not good. We don't really want something like that. If I was working in the animation industry and was animating this type of character, I'd get very frustrated with that because it wouldn't look good. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about paint weights. And what paint weights are basically information bound to every single little vertex in a character or model and how they're influenced. So for example, if I move this joint right here, I'm using the control, that control and that joint are influencing all the vertices in this character's arm right here, and that's because they're paint weighted to it. Now Maya does this automatically as you're building your model, but it's not always 100% accurate. So while in this case this is pretty passable, something with moving that shoulder down really isn't. You don't really want something like that happening. So what I'm going to show you today is how to paint weight your character two different ways and pretty much finishing your model. So what I'm going to do is, instead of using this character right here where it's very basic, I thought I'd show you a character that you'd actually use or see in a video game or an animation or anything like that. So let's get rid of our dummy for now and let's bring in this character. So what I have right here is a fully rigged character. I used Quick Rig on it just to get it done quickly, and I knew that Quick Rig won't have the proper paint weights done. So we're going to use this as our example to fix up how our character moves and looks. So right off the bat, this is pretty much a rigged character. It is probably good enough that, like, if we wanted to, don't want to play nice today, if we wanted to rotate parts of it, it is working. But for example, like if I move the foot right here, this boot, you could see how this area right here is stretching along with this area, which isn't correct, because if I'm moving my leg around on my left leg, it shouldn't have anything to do with the right leg, and this shouldn't be moving this way anyway. So what we're going to do is we're going to fix that using paint weights. So like I said, there's two different ways of paint weighting your character. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to move my leg around a little bit just so I can see where the problems are happening. I'm going to click on the geometry, and I'm going to go to Skin, Paint Skin Weights, and I'm going to go through the option box. What's going to happen is we're going to have this box pop up right here, and what it does is it shows every single one of my joints. And since I'm working on the left leg right now, I'm going to go in and I'm going to see what's going on. So paint weights work with a number system between 0 and 1. 1 means that the vertices are being completely influenced. 0 means that they're black and they're not being influenced at all. So as you can see, since I'm on my left leg currently, all this area is white, which is works really well. But if we look over here, there's a little bit of white on this other leg when it should be all black because we don't want it to be influenced. So what we're going to do is we're going to paint weight this area and fix it up. So the way we're going to do that is, first I'm going to change my brush. So this is our brush right here. It's a 3D brush, so kind of like change the angle based on the geometry it's hovering over. And I'm going to change my brush size to a little lower. So to change your brush size, you just hold B on your keyboard. You can move to the right to make it bigger, left to make it smaller, or down or up, however you please. So I'm going to make it a little smaller just so I have a little bit more control. And if I click and drag, it's going to paint on this leg. which we don't really want to do, because if I do that, it's going to snap over to the joint I have selected. So if I do this, it's going to snap over to the left leg. We don't want that. We want to get rid of it. So to get rid of it, we're just going to hold Shift on our keyboard, and we're going to slowly and nicely paint over these skin weights. And as you can see, it's just a little bit at a time, but the geometry will slowly kind of go inwards. We could also change the value over here to 0, so that if I regularly click, it'll change to 0, and it works a little faster, but you just gotta be a little careful with it and just take your time with painting, but it's really up to you. So I'll just change this back up. Oops, forgot to hold Shift, and just paint as you need. So that looks pretty good. I'm seeing less and less movement. I might even increase my brush size just to kind of work with it a little bit more. Now it looks good. So now what I'll do is I'll look over here. I'll get out my paint weight tool, select my control again, and let's move the leg around and see if it's still moving. So it is still moving, which isn't good, but in this case, I'll show you another way of doing your paint weights. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Vertex, and I'm going to drag a box around a nice portion of these vertices right here. You don't want to do too many because it will get confusing, but we're going to do that small portion right there. And what we're going to do is we're going to do this manually. So while the Paint Skin Weights tool is more of an interactive way of painting them, we're going to change the data manually. And to do that, we're just going to go to Windows, General Editors, and then Component Editor. What's going to pop up is this box right here. I'm going to move it to the side so we can actually see our geometry or our vertices. And we're going to go look through all these tabs until we find one that's called Smooth Skins. If I click that, you're going to be left with a very long list, depending on how many vertices you selected. So what that does is it will talk about every single one of these vertices. Oops. I gotta drag a new box around it if it wants to play nicely. So let's get all these. What it does is it shows every single vertex I currently have selected and shows what's being influenced. So in this case, this is my right leg, so I can see right here I have my rig character, right, and total. So those are all good, except the first two right here say left, which means that the controls on the left side are influencing the ones on the right. So what I'm going to do is I want to change all these to 0. And the easiest way of doing that is I'll kind of go in and I'll drag a box around all of them. You might not get all of them at once. I'm just going to type in 0, hit enter, and that will 0 them out. Then I'll just get the ones I just missed, just like that. 0, enter. And what that does is, as you can see now that I changed them all to 0, it got rid of them in that tab. That's because they no longer are being influenced by the left leg. So if I select this control again, move it around, you can see how a lot less vertices are being moved. I did miss some right here, so I would just go in and do the exact same process, either selecting them manually, which doesn't always work. So let's go get my component editor back up. Go back to my smooth skins. These are the left ones I can see from the name. And I'm just going to go in, get all those, change them to 0, hit enter. That got rid of them. And then I would go in, select the control again, and move it around. It did still miss some, but that's okay for now. So now that we did one leg, it's time to do the other one. So what we could do is, let me actually select my geometry again. Go back to my skin weights. I'll go in and see what's going on with the other leg. So it's going to be the same process. So here's my right leg. That's now lit up. And I'll do the exact same thing as I did on the other leg. So I'm just going to go in and paint away. So I'll go, and I'm just going to change this to 0 to speed up the process a little bit. And we just paint. Go from a couple of different angles just to make sure we're getting all of them. Maybe I'll increase the brush size a little bit, just speed things along. And that looks pretty good. So, I need to change this back up to 1 before I forget. Now if I move these legs around, a lot less is being influenced. And since I did the other leg, same process. So again, you can see there's a few vertices I missed, so you would always just fix those up. But that's pretty much all there really is to it. So now that I've finished those 2 legs, what I'll do is I'll click right here, click this, and then I'll go in and I'll click on this little lock. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it'll usually lock in your paint weight so that things don't change. So I know the rest of my leg is pretty good because I was just going through all of them, but you can just click, see if anything else on any other body parts are turning white as you go through them, and then lock them as you work with. So this looks pretty good. There is always a problem where sometimes you'll paint on one joint and then you'll see that it gets messed up somewhere else. So what I usually like to do is I'll work from the root joint or the root control that starts at the hips and work my way down the list. So in this case I would do the leg after the hips and just work my way through it, and then just keep checking on your character. So like right here, this is part of the spine, which is influencing the hips a little bit. So I would just kind of make sure I'll double check on the hips after I edit this, but usually the spine is good. The ones you run into the problems the most are usually the shoulders and and legs. Sometimes the head, but it really depends. So in this case, this looks pretty good. I'm just going to rotate from the joint to be sure because I know it's not working. But as you can see, it's kind of like pinching down here a little bit. So what I would end up doing is I'll go into my paint weights. I'll change my brush size smaller. And I'll just go in and edit those, just kind of bring them back out. So I'll just kind of go just like that. These are one of those situations where if you change the value to 0, it's not going to necessarily look good because it does change a lot to the character. So be very wary of that. That's why I usually say just keep the value at 1, hold shift, and just do a little bit at a time. That way you have a lot more control over how much you're changing on it. Because otherwise it's not going to look really good because you have to change a lot of little details and then smooth it back out. So that is done. Let's see, that looks pretty good. I'd probably get rid of some of the paint weights over here because we don't really want the elbow to control this area too much. So I'll just kind of work on that a little bit. And this changes for every single character. So that looks good. That looks good. So another thing you could do is, let me just go to the neck. That looks good. And the head looks good. I might want it to influence a little bit more of the head. Let's see how that looks. Actually, no, it should be fine as it is. It's not affecting anything else. Another thing you could do is, if I change this rotation back to, let's just put back at 0. Actually, it wasn't even set to 0. Oh. What we could do is we could mirror our skin weights. So to do that, I would select the character, skin, mirror skin weights through the option box. And what we're going to do is we would go from Y to Z and we hit mirror. And you won't see anything right here, but if I change, let me actually, there we go. This, it should carry over the skin weights I painted over here. I don't recommend doing this if your character is symmetrical. Well, I do recommend this if your character is symmetrical, because otherwise something like this will happen. So it might not always be the best decision. So I usually only recommend it if you have some things working really well. Let me see that fix it. There we go. But no, most cases I say you could just do it manually and it'll work out a lot better, but in some cases you can mirror it. But manually is usually the way to go. And then once you finish that, your character is pretty much good to go. And you could do whatever you want with it, animate it however you please. So like if I wanted to, I could go in and let's see. Let's just say I want to put this in here. All I'm doing right now is I'm currently taking this quick rig character right here and I'm assigning animation to it just really quick. So now if I look at him, let's get rid of this guy just so we could see what it looks like. So this is just our character with some animation put onto him. And let's change that to about 200 and see how well he goes. I'm actually going to hide my joints as well, just so you can see it a little bit better. Didn't hide him? Oh, it did. Okay. And I'll put my texture back on him as well. If I hit play, look at him go. And you can see that the character is moving nicely. Perfect. And that's all there really is to doing paint weights. Thanks, and have a nice day.